Hello, good evening, and welcome. It's the last Friday of the month, which means it's time for Natural History Museum Lates Online. I'm Khalil Thurlaway, I'll be your host for the evening. Now, while the museum's doors may have finally reopened to visitors, we still want to make sure the museum is as safe as possible for everyone. So, for the time being, we'll still be hosting these shows online rather than putting on those big, large scale events in the museum like we normally do. Tonight, we're partnering with the Natural Environment Research Council as part of our Nature in Lockdown collaboration. We've been hearing from you, the public, about how lockdown has affected our relationships with nature, how we've had engagement in all sorts of ways, including online events, surveys, even a photo competition. And we really want to know what you think about this stuff. So if you've enjoyed any of this content, please do head over to the website, nhm.ac.uk, and there you can find a questionnaire that you can fill in, and it can give us a bit of an insight into your attitudes to all the stuff we've been putting out over the recent months. So now that's out the way, let's get stuck into tonight's show. We asked you what you really wanted to talk about regarding nature in lockdown. And I've got three experts lined up ready to help shed some light on how lockdown has affected animals, air quality, and plastic pollution. First up, we've got Ella Browning from University College London and the Institute of Zoology. Hi, Ella. Thanks for joining.
Hiya.
And we've got Stefan Gillett from Imperial, and our very own Alex McGoran from the Natural History Museum and Royal Holloway. And we do love to hear from you guys at home as well. So if you've got any questions, please do pop them in the comment section and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time we've got. So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of tonight's discussion, let's get a little bit of a background on each of our speakers, just so we know where we're coming from. So Ella, what sort of who are you and what do you do?
So I am a PhD student based at UCL and the Institute of Zoology. And broadly, I'm interested in understanding the impacts of environmental change on biodiversity and how we can improve our monitoring methods for biodiversity as well. So my focus for my PhD is understanding how environmental change is impacting bat populations in the UK and Europe.
I mean, I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that bats are pretty awesome animals to study. So I think you picked a good one there. Stefan, what about you?
So yeah, I'm also studying a PhD. I'm based at Imperial, and I work on low-cost sensors that monitor particulate air pollution. And I do that through a range of means, but I do it for selfish reasons because I have to breathe, and I do it for altruistic reasons because everyone else has to breathe.
And I guess breathing is the great leveler. We've all got to do it, even animals and plants. Alex, what about you?
So I am also, like everybody else, a PhD student, and I'm looking at plastic pollution, specifically local pollution, so in our very own River Thames, and mostly in fish and the animals in the river, but also some of the sort of large pieces of plastic as well.
And I realise we've got quite a London-oriented panel tonight, but we are going to talk about broader both geographical and kind of environmental issues tonight. So don't think that we're just going to focus on the big smoke. So let's get, before we get into the broader discussions, let's delve into the factors that we're going to talk about so that we're all starting from the same page. So Ella, your work focuses on monitoring bat populations and behaviors and how they change, right? Why don't you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So monitoring biodiversity is generally really important for understanding impacts of environmental change. And as I'm sure everyone's aware, globally, human-induced environmental change is increasing, and this is having really negative impacts on biodiversity. But it's impossible to monitor all of these all species. So we try to monitor what we consider our bioindicator species. And bats are considered to be good bioindicators, as it's thought that their population trends reflect what's going on in the broader environment. And in the UK, we're lucky enough to have 18 resident species. So we have a really good sort of diversity of bat species here.
It sounds like bats are a very useful species to monitor, as well as being really cool.
Yeah.
But they can't be the easiest things to monitor. They're nocturnal, they fly very fast, they're not very big, most of them. So how do you monitor bat populations?
Yeah, so that's been a real challenge historically in trying to understand what their populations are doing. But one thing that bats do, which most animals don't, is that they echolocate. So they're constantly leaking information about their whereabouts and what they're doing into the environment. So we can use this acoustic data that they're constantly emitting to monitor which species are around and what they're doing. So they have these really beautiful social calls, which will tell us where they're mating or give us other information about their sort of social contact and structure. And also they do these feeding buzzes where they rapidly speed up their echolocation calls when they're approaching and hunting down prey. So that's really useful. The problem is that it's ultrasonic. The echolocation calls are ultrasonic, so we can't hear them. So we have to use these ultrasonic detectors or acoustic detectors. And this is a photo of one that I put out on my balcony actually at the beginning of lockdown. And these enable us to collect a lot of acoustic data and a lot of data about bat calls really, really easily, because anyone can just go and put these out and collect data.
And you say anyone can put these out and collect data. So do you kind of employ the kind of the help of the community and the wider general public when you're gathering data?
Yeah, so in the UK, we're really lucky that we have a lot of sort of world leading community science projects, and the Bat Conservation Trust has been running these community science projects since the 1997. So they rely on thousands of volunteers to go out and collect data. Like a lot of them are acoustic surveys, so they can go out with these acoustic ultrasonic detectors, and they don't need a lot of training or any training to be able to collect these data. So it makes it a really accessible way for people to be involved in biodiversity monitoring.
So since lockdown, have you noticed a difference in either in the amount of people participating in these community science initiatives or in the actual information, in the data, in the behaviour and the populations of these bats?
So I don't have any of the data from this year from those citizen science projects yet. So that will become apparent in the next sort of 6 months when the data from this summer has been collected. Anecdotally, I know that people have been at least noticing bats a lot more. So it could be that there's an increase in activity, or it could be that it's an increase in people taking the time to look and watch out for nature and watch out for bats in their garden at night.
Or I guess it could be a combination of those two types of factors, both the human factors and the kind of bat factors.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of bat species are negatively impacted by human activities. So it's possible with a reduction in human activities and things like lights and traffic that bat activity has increased this summer.
And I guess it's only been a few months, and so it might be a bit too soon to see big changes, or maybe the changes might become apparent in their knock-on effects longer down the line, right?
Yes. So with any effects on actual population sizes and trends will become apparent sort of maybe next year or the year after, when there might be a sort of increased survival of pups or increased reproductive success in the next few years.
And I guess that will also depend on what our next speaker studies, air pollution, because obviously we've had a decrease in a lot of our human pollution generating activity over lockdown. But let's get a bit of a background to that. So people might have heard of air pollution, Stefan, but it's not just one big cloud of stuff, is it? It's a bit more complex than that.
Yep. So air pollution comes in many different forms, and it can be both natural in origin, so forest fires and volcanoes, but it can also be man-made. So that's anthropogenic, and that could be from our activities in the home, such as cooking, that produces air pollution in your home. Driving, that's an activity that produces both gases from the exhaust, but also solid particles. That could be from the brake wear and the tyre wear. And most activities that we do generally will produce air pollution at some way along the chain.
And why do we need to monitor it? Because obviously we know it's bad, but what are the benefits of knowing exactly how much and where and what?
So there's the old saying that you find in business schools is you can't manage what you don't measure. And there's a lot of evidence now to suggest that air pollution causes a whole range of health impacts due to early mortality, but also lots of morbidity, so breathing conditions, respiratory conditions, and also one of the main findings that came out from our research group recently was reduces child's lung capacity, so it can affect you from a young age all the way throughout your life. So,
Go ahead.
so there's lots of money that's been spent on trying to reduce the concentrations of pollution, and if we don't measure it, we don't know if it's worked.
And I guess that point about morbidity is really important because, early deaths and things like that, they grab the headlines. But it's important to note that there are, damaging effects of pollution that are much more kind of insidious and low level.
Yes.
So how does your work contribute to our monitoring of air pollution?
So there's a standard model that we use at the moment to monitor air pollution that's kind of regulated in the UK and most developed countries, where we have expensive fixed monitoring sites that are kind of dotted around. And this is an example on the screen now of one of the atmospheric monitoring stations. So that monitors more than the standard air pollutants that we have for legislative reasons. This is basically a high-tech lab out on the side of the street. It monitors basically everything that we need to know. And what I do is I put my low-cost sensors alongside these monitoring stations, so we can try and improve their performance, so then we can start using these sensors in new different ways.
Because these big the ones like in the previous image, they're really, really expensive. They're really effective at monitoring air pollution, but it's not really feasible to have a lot of those, enough of those to get a real kind of fine grain geographical kind of map of air pollution. So how are you trying to make these kind of cheaper sensors work as well and give us as complete data as these kind of fancier, expensive ones?
So what we do is we put the local sensors at these stations and we take lots and lots of measurements of lots of different variables in the atmosphere. And this will start to tell us why these sensors don't work very well. And we can do that through standard methods, but we can use a data science approach. And then we can use fancy buzzwords such as machine learning to figure out why these sensors don't work. Then we can hopefully correct for that, or we can find out situations that we know the sensors don't work in, but we can find out situations where they do work. So then that's how we hopefully are going to be able to integrate these sensors into the future of air pollution monitoring.
And do you know if there's been any kind of in your data, has there been any difference in the levels of air pollution during lockdown? Because anecdotally, people have reported seeing kind of clearer skies when looking across cities, and we know there have been fewer cars and lorries out.
Yeah. So that's actually quite a complicated question to answer. The simple answer is yes. There's been less activities going on, so there's been less pollution emitted into the atmosphere. But at the start of lockdown, there was actually a pollution event which caught people by surprise. What's
a pollution event?
So that would be where meteorological conditions are unfavorable. So even though we're not emitting the pollution ourselves, they can travel long distances. So sometimes they can be emitted somewhere in another country, and then they can travel around, they can transform in the atmosphere, and then we experience it as air pollution, even though we haven't emitted it ourselves.
And we've had a question from one of our viewers, Ayana, who's asked, is it possible to get rid of air pollution? Can we take it out of the atmosphere, or is it just a matter of producing less?
So there's been some attempts at building, skyscraper-sized filtration devices. But that would be the same as putting a filter in your home and taking off the roof. It doesn't. People want to do it, and it's a nice idea, but it's practically very difficult to do because there is a lot of atmosphere to filter. So at the moment, the natural way to do it is to let it rain. The rain can take some of it out, and the wind can blow it away.
And you're saying that it's a very complex relationship between kind of the pollution that is produced and who is exposed to it and how. It also there's also a level of human behavior involved in that as well, as to how much we're exposed to.
Yes. So the fancy term that we use are microenvironments. So there's lots of microenvironments around, and we travel through them on a day-to-day basis. So for instance, the first microenvironment you wake up into is your home, and you'll cook breakfast. And then the next microenvironment you might enter would be a taxi or a car or a bus, or you cycle or you walk. So this chart here that you can see on the screen now is on the left, you've got cumulative pollution exposure. So that's kind of the additive pollution that you're breathing as you travel through your journey. And then on the bottom, we have the journey time in minutes. So as you can see, if you jump in your car, even though the journey time might be shorter than walking, you're in a high concentration environment. So you're actually exposed to more pollution overall.
And I guess using these different methods of transport, but also in different places, could kind of give you very different exposures. Whether you're taking a back street or a high road, stuff like that.
Yep, very much so. So you can imagine if you're walking on the high street and you see congested, loads of cars, loads of buses, and you can just walk a little bit down a side street and it feels like a very different place. And particularly with gases like NO2, so the NO2 pollution, its sole source is from the exhaust of vehicles, basically in a city. So if you come away from the road, it drops off very, very quickly. Whereas for particles, it's a bit more complicated than that. But yeah, you can definitely avoid high concentrations quite easily.
I think we're seeing a connection here between, just like what Ella was saying, between the environmental factors and the human behavior factors and how they interact in a really, really complex way. And we'll get a bit more seriously into that, kind of untangling that a bit later. But first, we want to go from the pollution in the air to the pollution in the waterways. Alex, so you study plastic pollution. People might have heard a lot about this. It's been in the news quite a bit recently. But why don't you just give us a little bit of a breakdown of that to start us off?
So obviously plastic pollution is sort of like the buzzword at the moment, I guess, and it is the sort of topic that we're all talking about. And I guess that's because it's such a global problem. You know, it's not in one specific area. It is literally every environment, everywhere on the planet will be affected by plastics. It's in the air we breathe. It's in our rivers. It's even in snow, and it's reaching deserted islands and the Antarctic. It really is absolutely everywhere.
And it's not just these big chunks of plastic that we might see on that image of the beach, or a kind of a lost fishing net, trapping a shark. There's a lot more insidious than that.
Yeah, so obviously the big plastic is a big problem, and that can cause some of these smaller particles. But whilst those are really dramatic and eye-catching, it's all these sort of unseen particles, these microplastics and these nanoplastics that are just throughout the entire food web and through your air and in every environment. And they're really hard to sort of picture because micro is a very scientific term. It means that it's very hard to kind of what is this plastic to the sort of general public. So I've got this image here, and it's a grain of rice with actually quite a large microplastic. So it's a bit of an odd term to say large, tiny plastic. But microplastics can be anywhere below 5 millimeters. So typically that's anywhere from a grain of rice all the way down to these nanoparticles, which is 1,000th of a micrometer, which is 1,000th of a millimeter. So, these very tiny, tiny particles that are just unavoidable if you're swimming along or inhaling.
But if they're small, why are they a problem?
So because they're small, that is the sole reason that they're so bad. Obviously, if you've got a carrier bag and you know that turtles eat those, they look like jellyfish. But plankton aren't going to be there munching away on a carrier bag to the same degree that a turtle is. Whereas these tiny particles, they could be the size that a filter feeder selects for. So, organic material might be the same sort of size. And if you're just bringing anything in that is that size, you might not know to not take in those plastic particles. And if you've got the base of the food web, these plankton, these tiny organisms eating plastic, it means that it could be moving up that food web. So if you've got a fish that eats lots of plankton, and then a seal or a bird eats all of those fish, you can end up with this sort of accumulation, this higher concentration of plastic right at the top of the food web.
I think we've got an image of that food web just next to this image, and it really shows how you get that kind of accumulation of plastics throughout the food chain. And so, how do you investigate this kind of environmental plastic pollution?
So for me, it's all about taking seasonal samples. So ideally, every 3 months we go out. Obviously, lockdown slightly changed the time scale on that, so it's not always exactly 3 months. But we try and go out and we fish. So we essentially use a commercial trawler, and that's like that you have to get special permission for in the Thames. The Thames is protected in terms of commercial fishing, so we will be the only trawler out there. So we know that we're not overfishing. We know that we're protecting that environment. And we collect any animals that we can in our net. So that'll be shrimp, crabs, and fish, as well as sediment samples. And so in this food web that you just saw, there was a seal. Obviously, we're not fishing for seals. We rely on animals that die naturally or by ship strike, for instance, and wash ashore. And then when members of the public report those, we then come and collect those and do a dissection. And
so you're looking at the levels of plastic in these animals, right? And you also you get plastic from the water itself. And what sort of plastics do you mostly find on a normal trawl?
So obviously when we're fishing, ideally in a healthy or clean environment, we'd only get fish in the net. But unfortunately, the Thames and pretty much every other river is full of plastic. So this is an example of some of the plastic that we get in some of the stationary nets that we used to use. So these are nets that sit on the riverbed about knee height. So it's sort of, if you were walking through the river, imagine it was shallow enough for you to walk through. This would be knee height, wading through all of this waste. And this is just in one day's collection. So it goes to show you just how much is there. And these are sort of the big main culprits. It's a lot of food packaging, crisp packets, chocolate bars, as well as the cellophane you get on cigarette wrappers, coffee cups, and carrier bags.
And these plastics last for ages, right? This is not just fresh stuff you're finding.
So plastic is really robust, and that's why it's great, because we can use it for so many things because it's so long lasting. But in the environment, it means that it's got a lot of time to break up, to fragment, make all these microplastics, but also to leak chemicals. And this is an example of probably the oldest piece of plastic we found. So if you look sort of in the middle of the image, there's a sort of best before date, and that is August 86. So this piece of plastic has been on the planet longer than I have. And, I think we all know hula hoops are typically red. So all of that red colouring, all of that chemical has gone, whether that happened in landfill and it's in soil or whether that was in the river. Either way, those chemicals are now a pollutant that are going to affect those animals in that environment. And
have you noticed in your kind of recent samples any difference in the amount or type of plastics that you're finding? Because, our behavior has definitely changed during lockdown. You see the lockdown tumbleweed, which is a kind of mask blowing past you on the pavement, and lots of disposable PPE and lots of packaging from people getting stuff delivered. Are you seeing that in the waterways?
So certainly it is something that I expect to find, and I think it's a bit like with the bats. It's not something you immediately see. Whilst we do see it, like I see it on my commute every day, so it is definitely in the environment. It's not something that a month after lockdown you suddenly go, oh, there's all the masks, can you bring them back up again? So we haven't really found any whole items. There's nothing that we can definitely and definitively say, look, here's a mask from the river or here's a glove. But in our most recent samples in September, we got samples that had a lot of blue film, so sort of 2D fragments, possibly from gloves. A lot of single-use gloves are shades of blue, but because of the way that they get damaged in the environment, they might not remain that sort of elastic, stretchy substance that gloves typically are. And these fragments aren't stretchy, so it's very difficult to say, is it a glove that's just degraded and lost that elasticity? Or is it something more like a carrier bag or something that's fragmented? So we can't say, there's definitely lots of mass here. but we know that in the future there might be, or that they're just not in the bit of the river we're looking at. So I only look at stuff floating sort of midway in the water column, or the bits on the riverbed. If they're at the surface or they wash onto the river shore, then they're not going to be picked up in these samples. So it's sort of a case that, there's so many, like with Stefan, there's so many micro places, like little micro environments that, they could be accumulating just one of those places. So there's a charity that does lots of litter cleans in the Thames, and they can tell you this bit of shore is the bit where the bottles are. If you want wet wipes, go to that bit. And it is very much like, regional locations. Like, this is the bit for bottles. Here's your crisp packets. So it is, very different for different pieces of plastic.
And also, I guess when you're talking about kind of the timescales that plastic lasts for and the journeys it takes, this feeds into the stuff we were talking about with Stefan and Ella, that we might be seeing changes in behavior and how we interact with the environment right now, but the effects of it and the measurable aspects of it might take quite a while to come into effect. And so now that we've had a bit of an intro into your three fields, I'd like to open it up a little bit more and have a bit more of a kind of broader discussion. And again, we've had another question from one of our viewers, and it's Ayana again, who's asking. So she has asked, do humans find it hard not to pollute? And I guess we can expand that into, our modern lifestyle. It does involve a lot of consumption and a lot of waste. How easy would it be to live a less polluting or less environmentally impactful, on a broader sense, life? So let's start off with whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I can take that one. The answer is yes. Yeah, we do find it very hard. So an example I'm going to just pick out is electric vehicles. So we have the technology to move cars through electric propulsion instead of combusting fossil fuels, which most people associate with pollution. However, even driving electric cars will still produce pollution. So they still have tires that rub on the road. They still have to brake, so you'll get brake wear particles. And depending on where the electricity comes from, it will still have to burn coal. At least the combustion isn't taking place in the city. It'll be outside in a power station. But yeah, even though we do have technologies that can improve the pollution and reduce it, the activities we do will still, at the moment, produce some kind of pollution.
And also, I guess we've got to bear in mind where the materials are coming from to make those batteries and electric engines and electronics. A lot of that is quite environmentally damaging to produce.
Yep.
So seems like it's really hard to try and we have to decide what impacts we're okay with having in various ways. What about you, Alex or Ella? You want to jump on that?
I'll jump in. So definitely for plastics, it is one of the really hard issues. How do you avoid something that is making absolutely everything we use? And I think it's a case of, with this sort of plastic pollution and this waste, it's much harder to avoid all of it. So it's a case of picking what bits are essential for you, because it will be completely different what Stefan needs to use compared to what I need to use, or what a family with kids will need to use. And I think sometimes with pollution, it's going to be a sort of give and take. It's, for any type of pollution, what one person says I can give up isn't always going to be something that everybody can. And sometimes I think that a lot of pressure gets put on the public, certainly with plastics. It's all about, you have to use your reusable carrier bag, you have to have a reusable coffee cup. And I think policy sometimes needs to fill that gap and take some of that pressure off people, and industry needs to do its bit as well. And I think in plastic, some of that is lacking. So I think sometimes it's kind of, you got to take a bit of pressure off yourself and know that every change you make will have an impact and it will be a positive change, but don't feel like it's your responsibility as well to sort of make every little change and to have to give up everything, because pollution unfortunately is very unavoidable in this modern world.
And what about recycling? Is that a magic bullet? Is that going to solve all our problems?
No. So recycling is the sort of, when you're a kid, you're taught reduce, reuse, recycle, and it's sort of like, oh, recycle, that's everything, just you put all your plastic in the green bin and somebody takes it away and ta-da, no more plastic. but actually there's not a perfect recycling system. It's cheaper to buy new plastic than it is to recycle the old stuff. You've got to process it and make it into a material that can be used again. So, for instance, most councils won't recycle black plastic, and that's because once it's dyed black, it is always black. You can't suddenly make it into a clear plastic bottle again, and that means that you've got to have somebody that's willing to buy black plastic. Whereas if it's clear, you can put it in roads, you can shred it for fibres, you can do all sorts of things with it. And at the moment, there's only so many times you can recycle certain products. It will vary very differently between materials and what they were made for and what chemicals are in them. But, recycling isn't the be all and end all that it sort of sometimes is dreamed of and pretends that it is. So when you see products that say made of recycled plastic, that doesn't always mean that it's better. Obviously, it's better than using virgin plastic, but it's not like, oh, I'm guilt-free now, I'm recycled.
So yeah, I guess we need to find broader systemic solutions to it. Like you were saying, changing up policy, changing industry, as well as our personal behavior in that aspect of how we interact with the world. What about you, Ella? Because you were saying that different bat species respond differently to human land use and stuff like that. How can we live our lives in a way that will be least impactful to organisms like bats and stuff?
So one thing which is a lot of research going into at the moment is how bats respond to artificial lighting. So obviously, as bats are nocturnal animals, artificial lighting is generally quite bad for them. And so some species actively avoid areas with artificial lighting. So one way that we could help bats is to reduce the amount of lighting that we use. And in some cases, that's not possible because of the need for lighting in streets for people to feel safe. So there's a lot of work looking into how we can use different coloured lights, which might have less of an impact on bats and other wildlife. So things like red lights or orange lights might mean that they sort of might have less of an effect on bats and mean that they don't actively avoid these areas, which will then, the active avoidance can have negative impacts on them because they're expending additional energy that they wouldn't have before.
And also, I guess that has an impact on the local ecosystem as well. If you're having certain types of animals that are actively avoiding an area, then you're not going to get the same kind of balance of interactions that you normally would.
Yes, exactly. And there's the other problem in that lights also draw a lot of insects away from other areas. So this can impact bats because it's drawing insects away from them, but also can impact pollination. So a lot of moths carry out pollination at night. And there's some evidence that plant product like reproductive success is negatively impacted where there's lit areas because the moths being attracted to lights, moths to a flame.
Yeah, and you see a lot of the street lights being replaced by these bright white LEDs recently. And it's interesting because that's been having effect on human behavior in terms of sleep as well as the behavior of the kind of animals in the area. And like you said, it's affecting the plants in a knock-on way. I guess that's another example of how the effects of small interventions like changing the street lights to bright white LEDs can have so many complex knock-on effects. And in terms of the effects of lockdown and the changes in human behavior on the animals in an ecosystem, we've had a question from Rona, one of our viewers, who said, hi, we're in Milton Keynes, and during lockdown we saw more wildlife and birds like deer, foxes, and badgers, but we've also had reports of giant rats. Is this a thing?
I did see something the other day where someone posted a picture of a giant rat in London, I think, but I've not.
I've seen giant rats in Streatham all the time.
Yeah, maybe I think it's just a London common thing. They're moving up to Milton Keynes.
Or maybe it's just that people are seeing rats when they don't normally see. Normally, you'll see mice, and maybe they're seeing rats, and rats are pretty big anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of animals which have adapted to urban environments have adapted to change their behaviour to avoid as much human contact as possible. So it is likely that, given that there's been a reduction in human activity, rats are becoming more bold.
And also, I guess it's the type of human activity as well, because, you know, restaurants and takeaways and stuff have been shut for a long time, and even now kind of reduced. And so a lot of the food waste that a lot of urban animals tended to come to rely on isn't there. So they're having to move around more and to explore more and coming into contact with humans more. I mean, I've seen so many more foxes since lockdown.
Yeah, I think that's likely a big reason for animals like foxes and rats, which do rely on sort of thrown away food on the street.
So we've had 6 months of lockdown of varying degrees, and there's a possibility that we might see it extended for some time. We don't know. At some extent, we still don't know. But if this situation continues, what do you guys think will be the effect, the longer term effect of a continued lockdown on our relationships with nature, or in your various fields?
I think it's going to depend on different things, actually. So, like, for me, I think plastic is going to become, if it stays like this, it's not the top issue, is it? I mean, everybody really cares about plastic, but suddenly safety is more of a concern, quite rightly, which means that you're less concerned with things like plastic, which maybe don't seem as pressing as the pandemic and as, keeping safe and keeping clean. How can we say single-use wet wipes are bad when they are, preventing the spread of disease? And so it's going to change things like that. And I think, unfortunately, there's a chance that sort of the blue planet effect, this idea that David Attenborough says that plastics are bad and everybody cares, fantastic. That buzz can only last for a certain amount of time. And if this pandemic and this issue presses for a really long time, it might be that issues like plastic just sort of drop off a little bit. And I want to say that it's really important, but you think about how long we've been talking about climate change and how hard it is to get, a real positive impact and real changes there. It might be that plastic suddenly becomes one of these issues that we talk on about and people go, oh, they're talking about that again, and sort of it sort of
and this kind of fatigue you're talking about, I think it might be part of the reason why David Attenborough is now on Instagram. Because he's realized that people are taking their eye off the ball, and he'd built up, and not just him, but the conservation community in general had built up such great momentum behind getting people to think about their kind of waste and their impact on the environment. And suddenly this big scary pandemic has come along and taken the attention away. So maybe that's why he's on Insta. He's going to be picking up plastic for the gram.
Yeah.
So what about you, Ella? You were going to talk about this, weren't you? The longer term possible impacts.
I think on people in terms of nature, I hope that it does make people feel more connected with nature again, and people have a bit more time to spend going out into nature and like experiencing. Even parks in London have lots of nature. So I hope that people sort of use this time to think about the importance of nature in their lives, but also thinking of, like, with the Biological Records Centre in the UK has reported an increase in sightings in loads of different animals. And hopefully that will encourage more people to be involved in like community science and reporting sightings, which would be really great. For me, for my data, that's great. But generally,
data.
It's hard to know exactly what the impacts will be longer term, because if we do go into such a strict lockdown again and human activity is really reduced, then that will likely have beneficial impacts. But at the moment, with sort of the traffic levels are kind of back to what they were before, and I live under the Heathrow flight path, and that's kind of the same as what it was before. Whereas sort of peak lockdown, there were hardly any planes at all. It was like really quiet.
I remember the first vapor trail I saw after like a couple of months of lockdown where you saw no vapor trails and it was really
Yeah.
weird. I remember
Yeah.
the first one I saw, I was like, what is that witchcraft?
Yeah, it was really weird seeing it and hearing it again. But things like traffic noise and airplane noise affects sort of how animals vocalize. Birds will change their vocalizations in response to traffic noise and noise of airports and things. So it's hard to know exactly the sort of how those things will change.
What about you, Stefan? Obviously there is the quantifiable thing of the amount of air pollution that is put out by increased or decreased human activity. But as we've spoken about, it's much more complex than just more in, more less in terms of the amount of pollution that we experience.
Yes. So the boring answer is only time will tell. But how do I feel about it? Is I'm optimistic that people will hopefully remember what it was like to breathe clean air. You know, when you cross a busy road, you can really tell that you've crossed behind a bus. And you could look over London without the smoggy haze hanging over it. And but again, people also need to get back to daily life for a multitude amount of reasons. People's mental health to get back to work. They still need to maybe travel. There's people that need to see family. But there's also talk of a cycling drive to reduce obesity, because that was what Boris Johnson was saying, because that was one of the risks of COVID. So more people getting into cycling would also potentially change people's behaviours with knock-on effects to air pollution. So only time will tell.
And I think what all three of you've been talking about, I think, sorry, really illustrates how science, in terms of the kind of the quantifiable study of the kind of the data, it doesn't exist in its own little vacuum. It is inherently linked to all the human factors around it, and it's our behavior is inherently linked to the kind of the environmental factors that we're measuring. And on that note, actually, we've had a question from one of our youngest and most regular listeners, who I'm really happy to hear from, Noah, is asking what are some of the kind of changes that we could make or behaviors that we could do that would have the least environmental impact? Oh, you're all looking very pensive. I'm going to start off with Alex, because she looked the least dumbfounded. Give the other two of you time to think about it.
So I would say my big thing is to be very wary of bio anything that sort of suggests that it's green and environmental. Take it with a pinch of salt. So a lot of discussion is happening now with bioplastics or compostable plastics. And these aren't always as amazing as they seem to be. So like plant-based plastics, for instance, essentially are still plastic. They may not be an oil product or it's a fossil fuel product, but they still in the end are plastic, and so they don't always have the sort of amazing green impact that we think they will. That's not to say that we're not developing stuff and that we might eventually get a sort of solution or alternative to plastic. But I'd say in terms of things that are definitely positive, don't flush anything down the toilet would be my reason. It's such an easy thing to do, but it's
anything?
one of the huge like the three P's can go down the toilet. So pee, poo, and paper, and anything else is a big no-no for me. So you get a lot of flushable wipes, and flushable just means it won't block your system. Yeah. Technically, I could flush a pen down the toilet or a razor, just because it doesn't block the system and it
you
goes
can flush
away.
a small cat down the toilet. It doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. It goes away, but that away
Don't try this at home,
isn't,
kids.
this yeah, don't put ideas in their head. Yeah. It's not like this magical somewhere else. It's not like because you flushed it and it's not in your home that it's suddenly, oh, that's gone, that's a solution. It does go somewhere, and that is to sewage systems, which just can't cope with some of the things we're flushing. You might have heard of fatbergs, these sort of wet wipe and sanitary pad blockages that just with fats that we wash down our kitchen sink and these products that go down the toilet come together, and that is hugely costly just to repair the sewage system. And those also can overflow into the environment. So at Hammersmith, there's an area about the size of 3 tennis courts that is almost completely artificial. It's just wet wipes. And I think in just 2 hours, it was like 250,000 or something wet wipes were collected. And that was just in the top few centimetres. And this bank is growing by a metre in height since it's been recorded. So, these things that we flush down the
So
toilet
maybe soon we'll have like a mountain range
dramatically
of
affect it.
wet wipe mountains.
Yeah.
It'll be like in 1,000 years' time, there'll be archaeologists of the future digging up these mountains of wet wipes, wondering what our civilization did to itself. Okay, so with Ella and Stefan. So this is probably going to have to be our last question to answer. So let's wrap it up with some advice for our audience as to what they can do. Stefan?
So in terms of air pollution, I would say don't worry about that so much. But in terms of pollution in general, I would say just make sure you're talking about it. You can do small efforts yourself, but also you can put pressure on to decision makers for policy change. So I would say keep talking about it is probably one of the best things you can do, and hopefully spread knowledge. So the more people that are on board with changing behaviour or changing policy can have far-reaching impacts.
Lovely, short and sweet. What about you, Ella?
I guess one of the best things that you can do as a person to reduce what that would make the least pollution is probably planting trees and planting plants. So for bats, the best thing to plant are pollinator-friendly flowers, pollinator-friendly plants, because that will encourage insects into your garden, which is good for bats and birds and lots of other wildlife. So I think, the least polluting thing you can do is to plant a tree, probably.
And even if you don't have access to a garden or anything, having like plants in like a window box or something like that can attract insects and other organisms. And it's really good for the mental health to be surrounded by a bit of life, even if it's just a little bit. Thank you so much, guys. This has been really, really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. Thank you so much. I'm gonna call it there. Thanks, guys. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
So thank you for joining us at home as well. I've really, really enjoyed this first half of Lates. Up next, we've got the Breakout Club, which is going to be a more informal chat with some of my friends and colleagues, the other science communicators at the Natural History Museum. We're also going to be announcing the winners of the Nature in Lockdown photo competition, which is part of our collaboration with the Natural Environment Research Council. So we'll be back in about 12 minutes. For the second half of tonight's show. So have a nice little break and we'll see you in a bit. Thanks. Hello and welcome back to Natural History Museum Lates Online. I hope you enjoyed our panel discussion. I certainly learned a lot. Now it's time for a bit more of a relaxed vibe. I've got my friends Alison and Christina with me. We're all science communicators here at the Natural History Museum. Hi Alison, hey Christina, thanks for joining. So we're going to have a bit more of a broad-ranging, relaxed chat about the issues that we were talking about in the panel, but also much broader stuff about lockdown and nature and our relationships with the two. And we'd love to include you in the conversation as well. So please do hit us up with any and all of your comments, questions, experiences of nature in lockdown. This is your conversation too. So why don't we start off with some of our experiences of nature in lockdown? So what's it been like for you guys? So like Alison, I know you moved flat just before lockdown, and your access to nature is a little bit limited at the moment, right?
It is a tiny bit, yeah. I'm in a top floor. Like many people in the big city, I don't have access to a garden. I have a window with a windowsill. That's about it. But I am really lucky to have a couple of local parks nearby, which have been just fantastic during lockdown. So I've been spending a lot of time there, and I've been paying a lot more attention to the nature outside my windows, and even having nature come to me as well.
What sort of nature has been coming to you? Is it kind of like a Snow White type thing where you just sing out the window and they all come land on you?
I wish. It's much less Disney than that. So I've got a couple of false widow spiders that live just outside my window, so a lot less Disney. But they are amazing. I've got a little tiny juvenile and then a much bigger, chunkier adult, and the webs that they have created. I don't know if you've ever seen a false widow spider web. I had no idea. They're these amazing kind of 3D scaffolding, quite messy, but these elaborate structures. So I've been enjoying watching them catch their prey. The adult comes out in the evening, but the juvenile seems to be about in the day a lot more often. So yeah, I've got my window spiders, which have been keeping me entertained. And I was so excited in the summer. I had a visit from a parasitoid wasp, a little ichneumid wasp that literally flew in my window and landed. So I got to kind of explore that. I didn't manage to identify it to species level though.
So you've been having a great time with the invertebrates, I guess. Like, I've always found it crazy how spiders, when they hatch from their eggs, they already know how to spin the right type of web. Like it's not something they learn. It's just something that they just know. And they're such complex structures. It's crazy.
They are amazing, incredible animals. I'm still a tiny bit arachnophobic, but I'm getting better.
I mean, I guess that's how you get over it. I used to love spiders as a little kid. I used to play with them in my hands and stuff. And then when I was way too young, I watched the film Arachnophobia, which is not even that good a film. But I had what I now know is a panic attack. And I became arachnophobic for years. And then I had to kind of train myself out of it by kind of hanging out with bigger and bigger and bigger spiders. I'm still not all the way there, but
no, definitely not. Me either. Absolutely.
Christina, what about you? How's your lockdown been nature-wise? I think you're on mute.
I think you're on mute.
Oh no. I think we might have lost Christina for the moment. She's going to have to do the entire talk through the medium of interpretive dance, unless we can get her audio sorted. So in the meantime, I guess it's going to have to be me and Alison and the mime of Christina.
No. I think it's working now. Sorry, guys.
Yes,
brilliant.
Yay,
sorry. Sorry about that.
This is the problem with live broadcast, guys.
I was saying
Christina.
I heard the question, luckily. So I was really lucky during lockdown because I was lent a garden. So our landlords who live below us gave us the key to the garden. So I had access to that. But opposite to Alison, which I think had more experiences with invertebrates, for me it was the birds. I managed to see and hear a lot of different birds I hadn't spotted in London before. And even the other day, I saw a jay just landed on the window, and that was really, really exciting. And I think is what Alison was saying, is just paying attention to nature more, because I think I had that space to just look out of the window and just focus on it, and maybe like you were saying in the talk before, maybe things that normally, you know, we will be in a rush and we won't see, we will notice, we were able to notice them during lockdown.
Yeah, I've definitely found that. So my access to nature is kind of maybe, so, you know, you've got Alison, who's got kind of the windowsill, and we've got Christina, who's got kind of the downstairs neighbour's garden. I've actually, luxury in London, I have my own garden. It's about that big, but it's my own little square of nature. I try to let it be kind of reasonably wild, although manageable. So that's been really nice. And I work in my kitchen, so my desk faces out into the window. And so I quite regularly zone out in the middle of meetings because I'm watching a squirrel bury some nuts or something like that. But I mean, just like Alison found, it's mostly spiders, really.
Yeah, a lot of spiders.
Mm-hmm.
But
And in fact, I think
no matter
we
what your
had
access to nature is, there's always spiders.
We had somebody saying on the chat, guys, Wendy saying that they've got above the bed. I would say just leave it. It'll eat all the mosquitoes out there. Actually quite nice.
Yeah, and I think that people really don't appreciate enough like the benefits that spiders bring. As you know, yes, there's a lot of legs, a lot of eyes, a lot of moving parts, but they're really valuable parts of our homes and our ecosystems and stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely think I'm definitely paying attention to nature a lot more. Like when I'm out in the park, if I see a butterfly, I'm now taking a photograph of it so that I can go and try and identify it later. But I think it's the case with everybody. We're at our homes, we're out in the parks more often. We're just paying a lot more attention to what is around us. And we had some lovely comments during the brilliant talk that you did earlier. We had I think it was Ayana saying that she had some baby pigeons on her balcony and that she'd named Squabbo and Cutie. So you know,
those are excellent names.
They're brilliant. So I think we've definitely been interacting with the nature around us a lot more and noticing it definitely a lot more.
Also, I think a lot of people have brought more living stuff into their homes during nature because, you know, we've been stuck inside, craving a bit of stimulation. People have started, you know, becoming plant parents or like getting kittens and puppies and weirder pets like scorpions and stuff. Oh, yeah, see, look, there's your new addition to the family. So why don't you introduce us to, so Alison first, then Christina, to your new family members.
So yeah, I have the number of plants in my flat is just growing exponentially. But yeah, this is one of my little monsters. This is a Monstera adansonii, which is a relative of the Swiss cheese plant family. So it's got the same fantastic leaves with all the little holes in. So these are go in an environment where they're underneath tall trees. So the holes in the leaves let the light get through to the lower leaves. But they're also gorgeous little house plants as well. So yeah, I've got a couple of these, but many more. Also a Swiss cheese plant, a bigger one as well.
So what about you? Because I can see there's some plants in the background in both of your images, but Christina brandished something long and thin earlier, and it went straight past the camera.
Well, the two plants that Alison mentioned, so the Monstera adansonii is that one there, and the Monstera deliciosa is that one there. But this one here is my avocado tree, which is lockdown years old. So I planted it, I started growing it at the beginning of lockdown. I got really good advice from one of our museum scientists. She's actually a planetary scientist. She works with meteorites, but she's really good with plants, Natasha Almeida. And she told me how to grow it, and I started growing it at the beginning of lockdown. And look, it's really big now. You can see it's a tree. It's the that stone over there of the avocado.
So what are the secret pro tips that we can give to our viewers about how to grow an avocado that looks that beautiful?
Just keep trying. It took me ages. This has been 1 out of 10 that have grown, really. But yeah, there's like loads of like little tips that you can find online. You just have to try everything and see what works for you because, yeah, it's tricky. But, you know, it does work and they look really, really lovely. But plants like Alison have the monsteras and any trailing plant, it's so easy to they're so easy to propagate through cuttings. So you just put them in water and they grow.
So, you know, we've been talking about bringing nature into the house, but Also, just like from a lot of anecdotal evidence and from the conversation we were having in the last talk, people have been reporting seeing more animals. And I think we've got an infographic here from the BRC in collaboration with the NHM, which is just a few examples of the increase in reported sightings of things like hedgehogs, bats, butterflies, even stuff as big as deer. But then again, how do you unpick whether it's people being more at home or their leisure activities being out in the wilderness more? People aren't going to festivals, they're not clubbing, they're not going to things like that. And is this the animals being more out and about, or is it the humans being more out and about, or is it a bit of both?
I think sorry, Elisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, I'm kind of edging towards the us spotting them more, but I think it's potentially a little bit of both for certain animals, certainly, because us not being around is encouraging them to come out perhaps a little bit more. Foxes definitely. I mean, they're quite bold anyway. We mentioned rats during the talk earlier. So yeah, if there are less humans around, then certain species will come out a bit more often, and with less noise pollution, less light pollution, that type of thing. It's tricky to unpick that one. You kind of need strong data before, during, and after, don't you?
Yeah, because memes don't count as data. Because there are all these internet memes going around, which like, oh, nature is healing. Oh, the swans have come back to Venice. First of all, those pictures weren't even taken in Venice. They were taken in Burano, which is like the Croydon of Venice. It's like a little bit outside. Also, the swans were always there. Yes, the waters in Venice are a bit clearer now that you're not getting so much boat traffic, but I think you've got to be careful about kind of overblown claims that are made on the internet. It is really cool at a time of stress and craziness and chaos to see something that makes you feel good, but actually you got to be aware of kind of the legitimacy of that kind of information.
I think it's part of at the beginning of lockdown, I think people were trying to see the positive of it, and I think we all focus on, okay, what can be good of us being all locked at home? And that is, well, there must be something happening outside. Let's see what comes out. But I think people at the end realized that, people started joking about it, like the same Venice picture, but with the Loch Ness or mermaids and things like that. I think that popped up because people say, wait, I think it's really nice to know that the public were saying, oh, okay, maybe we need more information to actually start saying that nature is healing because we're all in our houses. But yeah, I think we saw a lot of that. And yeah, in part, I think it was because we wanted to see that. We wanted to see we want to see a positive side of lockdown in some way.
But at the same time, I think there's something quite beautiful about seeing people take the mick out of something as well. I think there's something quite cathartic. With the catharsis that we were looking for from these nature is healing memes, we found in taking the mick out of these nature is healing memes, which, it's all a win in the end.
Absolutely. I think my favorite was the plesiosaur in Venice, and the Daleks as well in the
I mean, if the Daleks are here, that would be very on brand 2020. I'm just waiting for, a news report to say the seas are boiling off the coast of Japan and a giant reptilian Godzilla monster has emerged to kill us all. I wouldn't be surprised anymore, But in terms of like nature, I'm not going to say healing, but in terms of nature reclaiming spaces in the absence of humans, there are lots of examples of that in both in small scale. When you see like a bit of derelict land, even in the middle of a city, you see plants trying to reclaim it and colonize it in different stages. And like on a big scale, we've got stuff like Chernobyl and Angkor Wat, places where, like Angkor Wat, it was this center of this medieval Cambodian civilization for like 700 years. They thrived on controlling the waterways, and that was what kind of built their society. And then they had a period of really, really harsh droughts and then massive floods, and it just destroyed their civilization. And now the temple and the city is still there in Angkor Wat, and the jungle is very much reclaiming it. And the balance of the ecosystem for ages was actually still not great, because there was a lot of over poaching of the animals that lived there. But since the 90s, there's been a lot of control of hunting and poaching in the area, and lots of reintroduction of native species as well. So you've had gibbons and monkeys and stuff like that, and they're actually really thriving. And some of these animals that started off as they were rescued from like animal trafficking like rings, and that then their behavior was really messed up because they've been so traumatized, they're starting to re-establish kind of normal wild behaviors, which is cool.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And you mentioned the Chernobyl there, which is a really interesting case, because obviously with the 19-mile exclusion zone, that humans are just not present in that area, and it does seem like nature is in many ways kind of reclaiming and thriving in that area. They're seeing increases in all kinds of species. Now, obviously, we're not. The science isn't quite sure in terms of what the long-term effects of the radiation are on those species, but the simple absence of humans seems to have increased the abundance of certain species.
So does
Definitely.
that mean that in the short term, at least, humans are worse than radiation? That's what it sounds like.
I know, it's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Right? What are we doing so wrong that a nuclear explosion is not as bad?
Yeah. Quite scary, but it is amazing how quickly nature can reclaim like derelict spaces. Yeah, you see like derelict buildings, and you'll see mosses suddenly appear, and then grasses and then small flowers, and yeah, if you just leave well alone, it's amazing how quickly nature can reclaim.
But you guys were talking about big examples as well, but I think even on areas during walks and so on, you would see areas that had been roped off. So for example, I don't know, children playing parks, or the outside gyms, and you will see how different it was, that area where nobody could actually access, compared to the areas where people could still walk. And you will see plants breaking through the pavement, and mosses, as you said, sometimes lichens as well, already growing there. So actually, nature making its way through and saying, "Oh, okay, it's quiet here. It's time to grow. Nobody's going to bother me." Again, and wild plants for that are amazing. You see them growing in the weirdest areas. So I think if they don't have anything to stop them, they even thrive in those.
I think there's a lot to be said for even generally just leaving a lot of spaces a little bit more wild than we do at the moment. So, at the moment, a lot of like public land is very closely mowed and trimmed and stuff. A lot of private land as well, a lot of lawns and areas of garden that actually we don't need to be regulating so harshly. And if you let things grow a little bit wilder, especially over the autumn and winter, then you can get a much richer kind of ecosystem. You get a lot more wildflowers, you get more insects in your garden, get more birds. So rather than putting down AstroTurf or pavement or having a really nice manicured lawn, maybe consider, just letting it do its thing a little bit.
Definitely. There's lots of great advice on the museum's website, actually, of all sorts of little things that you can do, whether you have a garden or whether you simply have a tiny little patch of land. So yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do, but that just leaving space for nature, letting things kind of take their course is often quite a nice approach. During lockdown, I was reading a book called Wilding by Isabella Tree, and it's about NERC, the NERC estate, the farm. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but it's in West Sussex. It's 3,500, I think, acres of what was farmland, quite intensively farmed land, that they have essentially kind of tried to rewild. So the arable fields have been left to run wild. Their principle is really to let nature take its course, let natural processes unfold without too much input from themselves, basically. So they've got no internal fences, no predator control. They've introduced free-roaming herbivores to mimic the grazing of extinct animals that were in our landscape sort of thousands of years ago. And they're sort of edged their way to a kind of slightly more sustainable way of farming. So they have got longhorn cattle, they've got Tamworth pigs, red and fallow deer, they've got Exmoor ponies as well. And it's a really fascinating book. It's a brilliant book to read when you're in lockdown, because it just paints this beautiful, vivid picture of this landscape just kind of springing to life in all these unusual and unexpected ways. And they've got really rare species now as well. Things like turtle doves, nightingales, purple emperor butterflies are now breeding on the site. And that's just sort of over the last kind of 20 years. So amazing, really, an amazing major project. I would highly recommend reading the book because it's just so interesting. But of course, really, we don't all have 3,500 acres. Some of us have window spiders, but there's things that we can all do.
But it's really interesting you talk about the kind of active human work to try and kind of re-establish wildlife, both in a kind of systemic way, because there have been some real success stories of when on the downside we've taken either environments or individual species right to the brink of extinction, but then once we've actually decided that we need to have concerted action to improve the situation, we had real success stories. So if you look at like blue whales, you've got Hope the whale hanging up in the Hinsey Hall, the main hall of the Natural History Museum. She's called Hope because of that kind of hope for how humans can do better. Because we over hunted. Well, I think any hunting of whales is probably over hunting, but we hunted whales, like especially blue whales and right whales and minke whales, really, really harshly, right to the brink of extinction. But since the kind of mid to late 20th century, we've been working quite hard to give them the opportunity to rebuild their populations.
I think the blue whale, Khalil, is a really good example as well, because it also shows how hard it is, even though they are doing better, and even though there's been like a global effort, like the whole world came together and said, okay, we've almost killed all the whales. They went down from 250,000 species in the 19th century, probably more, because I don't know how they would count the whales there, to 400 only.
Just 400 whales?
In 1966, yeah. And now they've recovered in those 40, 50 years, but they're still only 20,000. So you can see with the numbers that they're not even a tenth of what they were. So even with a global effort, everyone put in the strength together to conserve these, to preserve, to protect these species, and still is not enough to go back to the numbers in the past. It's amazing. Yeah, and it's funny as well, because the reason that blue whales were so big that they couldn't really be hunted, it was really difficult to hunt them. And it was until somebody developed a special harpoon that they decided, oh yeah, actually we can kill them. And they just destroyed them in 50 years or so.
It's frustrating, like how much ingenuity and resources and effort and time go into stuff like making a more powerful whale killing harpoon, or like inventing a bomb that has more knives in it. If that effort and that talent was directed to looking at sustainable energy, or how to store electricity efficiently, or new ways of building things in sustainable ways, the world could be so different.
Absolutely, we can do it, and there is obviously still more to do, particularly with whaling. But when we all make that concerted effort and we all decide to do something together, that we absolutely can put our collective intellects and our resources together, and we really can make a difference. There are many examples of species that we have brought back from the brink of extinction. If you saw the David Attenborough documentary, Extinction, the Facts, very emotive documentary, that one, but he mentioned the positive story of the mountain gorilla. Again, that's an example where there is still a lot more work to do, but there are thought to be around 1,000 mountain gorillas now in the wild, whereas before there was less than half that. So So we can make a difference. So it's a step in the right direction. There is more to do. But yeah, if you look for examples, there are many, many examples of species that we have brought back from the brink of extinction. So we can do it. We absolutely can.
And I guess it's very easy to fall into the trap of just being like, humans are trash. Look at all the terrible things we've done. Do we really deserve to still stick around? Would the world be better without us? And especially with the pandemic at the moment, there has been a little bit of doom mongering by some people, being like, this is, the kind of, you could call it kind of eco-fascism, being like that, that Mother Nature is wiping us out because we deserve it. But if we think about the people who actually are suffering, that there's a lot more human societal issues wrapped up in that. But there's a lot of like fiction, like science fiction and speculative fiction, that explores what Earth would be like without people on it, and or with humans drastically reduced. Go.
It's funny that you were talking about we were talking about whales before, and it just made me think about I really loved when I watched it in even just Endgame. So I'm not going to get into the details in case somebody hasn't seen it early, so
spoilers.
Easily. But there's a moment where there might be some wiping of human civilization in some way, and I think it's Captain America that goes and say, there are even whales in the River Hudson. It's just like, it's again a message of like the I've heard and I've seen on social media, like, we are the virus, it's our fault, which in part is true, but as you said, Khalil, there's so many ways of analyzing it, and as we said before, we are damaging the nature, but there's so much behind how we can actually get nature to recover. And yeah, as you said, there's so many examples in science fiction. The moment you wipe out humans, nature finds a way, nature breaks through, and you get these images of huge cities covered in trees and wild animals roaming around, and the main character of a film just looks and see a deer looking straight at them in the middle of New York City, that kind of feeling. And I think at the beginning we felt a bit like that when we were told you need to stay at home. We thought, okay, is this it? I don't know, I got that feeling at least.
Oh, I remember it totally did feel like you'd go to the shops and the streets would be deserted, and you'd feel like you're in a zombie film. It was very, very disconcerting.
Did it feel like one of your video games?
Absolutely, it felt like The Last of Us. In fact, we were chatting about that before the show. There's a scene in The Last of Us, the first half, where Ellie and Joel they you come through these kind of tunnels and through these windows, and suddenly they come across a giraffe that's just hanging out in the middle of the city in America, and obviously must have escaped from the zoo, and there's a whole family of them, because it's meant to be a couple of decades after the initial fungal outbreak that causes the zombie apocalypse. But I think there's a really interesting dynamic there, because zoos are a kind of a very well-established, well-known thing of like humans controlling nature, and the fact that when human gets destroyed by this kind of zombie apocalypse, nature breaks out of that zoo and is now doing totally fine in a totally alien place, and it's the humans that are in that precarious situation.
I think it would be a good idea for people if they share what they would think would happen if lockdown continued and we had to stay at home and everything changed. We had to stay in our homes. How would you imagine your city, your town, wherever you live, will look like in even those 20 years of The Last of Us? What would you see will happen? Because I think each one of us will have a different feel and idea of what would happen, influenced by obviously science fiction and films and books and so on. But that idea of growing nature, which plants, which animals do you think you will see more as well? So it'll be great if you can tell us.
I mean, if it's anything like my garden, we rocket and strawberries. I don't know if that's a really middle class thing to say, but they're taking the place over. I'm fighting them off with a pointy stick.
I'm really worried about the poor zoo animals that didn't manage to escape. What happens to them?
I mean, they probably kept the other animals alive, if you know what I mean. Like that line in Finding Nemo: "Fish got to swim, birds got to eat." So I think now's a good time to start wrapping up. But I think before we wrap up, it'd be really good to look at some of the winners of the photo competition. So in collaboration with the Natural Environment Research Council, we've been running a photo competition online for the past few weeks. And the winners, the 15 final selected entries are going to be displayed in our Images of Nature gallery in the museum for the next couple of months. But we have here some images of the 3 judges' favorites. So this one here is by Ian Wade, and it's called Scaffolding Snail. So let's get your impressions of it first before we talk about the thing behind it. What do you guys think?
I think it's
Alison, you want to go first?
Actually, I'm very impressed with that. I've always paid close attention to our Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition, which is an exhibition which is out, and I think that's a really, really beautiful shot. And a snail is, these are those overlooked animals that we don't give enough credit to. Yeah, I love a mollusk.
I mean, I love the colors. I'm a sucker for purple, and there's a kind of like a blue to magenta vibe in the back, and a nice little contrast. It's cool.
You said I'm a sucker for purple. I'm a sucker for snails. Every time I see it on the pavement, I pick it up, put it somewhere else to be safe. I don't know. It looks quite happy and safe there, so it just makes me like that when I look at that picture. And yeah, definitely the colors are quite representative of those like nights in lockdown.
So what the photographer said about it was with the spread of COVID-19 and lockdown, social distancing rules are brought into place across the UK. This meant all building work stopped on our house temporarily. The local wildlife took advantage of this, and on damp evenings, snails would use the scaffolding bars as a little highway. So I guess this was one of many snails, which, for Christina, I guess that would be great. But I don't know, looking out your window and just seeing like 100 snails everywhere, I can think of better things.
Where are they going? Highway to where exactly?
I mean, at least someone's still got a social life, you know what I mean?
True.
And so our next of the 3, and these are in no particular order, by the way. These are just the judges' top 3. They're not in any ranked order. This is called Henri Befriended by Jake and Alice Dunn. So this is Henri, I think, a baby gull that they got to know during lockdown, who stood out due to the missing leg. And every day the gull would land at their window awaiting a meal, and slowly their trust kind of built up. And now apparently the gull even comes when they call Henri. I must say, I've had an email from our bird curator to say that actually you should probably not be feeding wild birds from your hand, especially not bread, because bread can stick in their crop and make it difficult for them to eat other things. So if you are going to feed birds, look up your local wildlife organization guidelines, but generally stuff like seeds and even like sweet corn and peas are great for birds, but bread, not so much. But this is a great photo. It's lovely to see that kind of like person trapped inside, really interacting with something that is so outdoors. Like a bird is like the ultimate symbol of freedom,
Absolutely. And gulls often have a reputation for being a bit pesky as well, don't they? Particularly at the seaside. Have you ever had your ice cream nicked by a seagull? So yeah, this is quite a gentle kind of rehabilitating image. I think it's beautiful.
I wish I had bought a bird feeder in time, because again, as I said at the beginning, I loved watching the birds out of the window, and I thought many times about buying a feeder, but I didn't want to order it or go out and buy one, so I held back a little bit. But yeah, I think I was craving that interaction as well, of like, I want to give them something. They're there, I want to give them something, so that represents a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's sweet, especially because it's it's an injured bird. There's that kind of caring vibe. And our last one doesn't actually feature any animals in it at all. This one's called Non in brackets Essential by Sophie Barlow, and this is about their first non-essential trip out as a family after 2 months of lockdown. And it was a beautiful sunny afternoon, and then they just wanted to lie down amongst the flowers and grass and just feel that connection with nature again. And you can really see there's like a physical and emotional connection there going on. I mean, it makes you just want to lie on your back in a field of flowers.
Definitely, that is so relatable. The first thing I did when we were all allowed to actually meet one another and meet friends was meet a friend for a socially distanced catch up in a park. And it felt a lot like that. It was like shoes off, feet in the grass. Really beautiful.
Also, her face looks actually pretty weary as well. She's like, that's a face that's been inside for 2 months, you know?
Yes, definitely.
That's a face that's like, I'm happy to be here, but
I think we all feel like that a little bit at some point. I mean, when our landlords, as I said before, they lent us the garden, and the first time I went into the garden, I just lied on the grass. I needed that as well, so I can relate to the picture. For me, it was really great to, when I was planting and doing some garden, just putting my hands in the mud and in the soil and just felt that. So it's a bit of that of being close to nature after being in your flat for a long time.
So we've had a few comments about kind of the state of people's kind of interactions with nature, and Vyacheslava Hancock saying that she really loves the bird, the seagull in that picture. She has a seagull as a pet in the backyard as well. Apparently, he's apparently got a little leg ring. So I don't know if you can call it a pet. Like it's still a wild animal, but I mean having that kind of interaction with animals is always really nice. So with that, I think it's probably time to wrap it up for tonight. Thank you so much, guys. I've really enjoyed having this nice little chat, and I hope you at home have also enjoyed it as much as we have. I know things have been a bit weird recently, and they're probably going to keep getting weirder for a bit, but it's really important to look after ourselves and each other and the world around us as much as possible. If you've enjoyed tonight's show, do check out our other show, Nature Live, which airs live on our YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope channels at 12 on Tuesdays and 10:30 on Fridays. You can also catch up on all our previous shows on our YouTube channel. Until next time, my friends and guests were Christina Torrente and Alison Sheen. I've been Khalil Thurloway, and that was Natural History Museum Lates. Thank you and good night.